Welcome back, everyone. Pal Ponder on Weather here. Happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. We've got one more day of intense severe weather before things start to settle down on the severe weather front. Plus, we're going to be taking a look at the tropics because they're starting to get more active, as well as the overall extended range. So let's take a look at the overall setup going forward. And we can see from the latest satellite imagery, we've got a convective complex that came out of Oklahoma last night that's now entered portions of the southeast. Man, they had some intense storms yesterday in portions of western Texas, as well as into the Oklahoma area and Kansas into the overnight time frame. Now that convective complex is now shifted off in a good part of the southeast. That's the setup for the severe storms today. So let's take a look at the setup going forward and take a look at the breakdown from what happened last night. And man, those intense supercells really blew up in West Texas. We were doing live coverage for this event. And yeah, we had big time hail producers out in West Texas and also into Oklahoma. You can actually see so far preliminary reports up to 9 tornadoes reported. And this is very preliminary. 3 of them actually came in West Texas, but several in Oklahoma, 1 in Colorado, and it was also into the Florida Panhandle. But the winds were really intense, especially into Oklahoma. In fact, Tulsa topped out at 100-mile-per-hour wind gust right around 1:15 in the morning as this just intense squall line moved through the region. But we had several reports up there in Beavers, Oklahoma. 3¼ inch hail, some 3-inch hailstones out there in West Texas. Now that same system has continued to lift off into the southeast, and yet we have another enhanced risk for severe storms yet again today. So now today is highlighted over a good part of portions of Arkansas, Louisiana, back into Mississippi, into the Alabama region. Those are the favorite areas to see the most intense supercells. Later on this afternoon, there could be some weakness further south of Dallas and could have some stronger storms in central portions of Texas. But breaking down the risk, this is going to be a main threat would be the wind. So we're going to be still seeing those winds gust at 60, some upwards to 80 miles an hour heading into the Shreveport area, back into the Jackson region, back into Mobile, including Montgomery. So all these areas look to be under the gun to seeing some of those strong wind gusts and some larger hail too. So still we have a hatched risk in place. Those could be some big time hail producers. Some golf ball size hail like we've seen of late, and then maybe some isolated reports of even some of those tennis ball size hail is definitely not out of the question with the dynamics in the atmosphere. But overall, here's the precipitation. So it definitely starts to dry out in the middle of the country as the ridge will be the name of the game for a good part of Texas, and the heat is just going to be dangerously intense with the compounding heat index. But the rain showers are going to be well to the north. Actually, some very heavy rain up in Canada. But this shifts further off into the southeast. So now, as these convective complexes really start to congeal together, it's not out of the question we could be seeing some isolated areas. And we saw that last night in Oklahoma. Could some isolated flash flood warnings in effect too. So don't be surprised, because this atmosphere is capable of producing some 2 to 3 inch rainfall rates at times. You get that in a short amount of time, you're going to get rapid excessive flooding. And I do feel on an isolated basis that's going to be certainly the case. While much of southern Florida definitely gets on the rain, and then I think this whole area is going to be eventually inundated with very heavy rain really over the next 10 days. And it's all complements of this ridge. It's really going to be dominating and pushing over into Texas. I mean, with the extreme heat is moving in from Mexico and just parking itself literally over central Texas, and combined with the heat index, we've got dangerous heat indices, excessive heat warnings, and those will start to overtake pretty much almost the entire state, probably much besides the Panhandle. Well, what is this, guys? That's a freeze watch and a freeze warning up there in Oregon. That's pretty cold air stuff over Oregon and Nevada there. Yeah, with a pretty good trough that's going to be coming in, and it's not just a one-day wonder. That's a cold shot that's going to last for several days, if not 5 or 6 days up there in that region. So if you want to escape the heat, just all you have to do is head west because it's going to be almost downright chilly in spots. But man, in the middle of the country, it's just all about the heat. And I can't warn enough, folks, this is some dangerous stuff. It's pretty rare to have heat indices upwards to 120 degrees. That's no joke, folks, especially further south into South Texas, Central Texas, getting into the Houston region, even to the Dallas-Fort Worth area for Monday and Tuesday. Actual temperature 100 to 102, but feels like it's approaching 115 to 120. That is some dangerous, intense heat. And again, this is going to be lasting all week long, because right now the latest guidance puts it at least through the 25th of the month. So that puts it all the way to next Sunday, at least, with these dangerous high heat indices in this region. So let's take a look at the tropics, because we've got a formidable wave out here. In fact, the National Hurricane Center gives it a 90% chance of it becoming at least Tropical Storm Brett out here into the open waters of the Atlantic. It's actually a pretty favorable environment. We talked about the water temperatures being so well above average for this time of year, so it's a little bit rare to have something this form this far out, but nonetheless the conditions are ripe. Now, typically what happens with these systems, since they're so far out, if you get a stronger system early on, it tends to lift more west northwest bound and eventually get pulled out to sea. But typically, if it remains on the weaker side, that typically keeps it westbound and then would likely pull it into the Caribbean. What's the most likely probability to happen? It gets pulled out to sea, but it's going to intensify. It's going into a very rapid developing environment, so it's not out of the question this definitely takes the name Brett over the next day or two. But the latest hurricane guidance actually takes this up to a potential hurricane by the time we head into Friday. And this model does pretty well, guys. The HWRF, it's done really, really well the past 2 seasons. So I'm not surprised if this actually even does become a hurricane. But what's going to happen is this is going to continue, I guess, again, west-northwest bound and approach the Lesser Antilles by the time we hit Saturday, potentially Sunday time frame. But again, that stronger system boasts ensemble members on the European guidance, combined with the abundance amount of shear. Once it gets up towards the Puerto Rico region, it should rapidly disintegrate this particular storm if it does form and take the name, which I think it will. So I think it gets pretty close to the Lesser Antilles. It may even clip portions of Puerto Rico, but once it gets out in this region, I think it rapidly has its demise and it becomes just kind of either a fish storm or no impact to land whatsoever. But I'm thinking it could very well be a possible hurricane by the time we head into, Friday, Saturday time frame. So beyond that, let's take a look at the setup. So what we're looking at here is, again, the ridge is going to be pretty dominant in Texas, but you see a weakness once you get further north into Oklahoma, and that weakness is in the form of this pretty good trough that's going to be forming off the southeast, as well as that trough with those colder temperatures. That's why we've got the flood, the freeze watches in place in parts. And it's going to be cold. I mean, it's going to be cold for at least 4 or 5 days out here into the West Coast. And we're going to be getting some sort of like a mega blocking type setup pattern starting to take shape. So if you break down the next 5 days, this typically starts to put the squash on severe weather. So we've had a very active time frame over the last 3 or 4 weeks. Now the pattern's going to start to settle down a little bit, and where the active placements of rainfall is going to be is really off into the southeast and eventually head up the East Coast. So where you see these blue shaded areas with below average temperatures, I think these are the most favored areas to see the most abundant amount of rainfall over the next 10 days, then heading up into the East Coast. And out west, it's all about the chillier air, and it's even going to be snowing to some of these higher elevations, but it's going to be chilly for an extended period of time out west before that will be moving out into the Pacific. So let's break this thing down for you. So going on Monday, again, we've got a slight risk for excessive rainfall that's going to be inundated the Florida Panhandle, back into southern portions of Alabama there, heading into Georgia, up through the Carolinas. We could be looking at multiple inch totals just on Monday alone. And then going into that Wednesday time frame, kind of the same deal. So we have the axis shifting, and then with the trough and the ridge, everything's going to be up and over the ridge. And then the Gulf moisture is going to be open for business. It's going to just be a steady stream of moisture up into this region. And then I would expect flash flood watches to be in place, for portions of the week. So we're going to be getting too fast, too furious up here. And we're going to be adding to some serious rainfall totals. We are going to have another system kind of set up shop in the middle of the country too, back towards portions of Nebraska and through the Dakotas, going into portions of Minnesota, that it's eventually going to bring some heavier rains for them. So the breakdown on the latest blend of models between now and the next 5 days, right? So in the next 5 days, we've got that portion in the middle of the country. We've got multiple inches of rain draping across portions of Nebraska through the Dakotas, and eventually I think that creeps into Minnesota. And then we have that very heavy rain up there in Canada, but the main threat is going to be off into the southeast. Multiple inch totals, if not 5 to 6, 8-inch totals is definitely not out of the question in some of these isolated areas. Notice the good part of the Northeast is fairly on the drier side, but beyond that, the rain really starts to kick in for them, because if we take the extended view and look at the overall 500 millibar as we head into possibly next weekend, going into the 24th, 25th time frame, again, we still got that ridge building further off into, for much of the southern plains, that I think it eventually actually shifts a little bit off into the southwest. So much of the desert southwest, you're going to be rapidly warming in a big way as the heat dome would really start to overtake this region. But again, the weakness in the trough is going to be highlighted more or less over the southeast coast into Florida and eventually up the northeast coast, while we do have some cold pockets aloft up there in portions of the Dakotas through Minnesota, which also is going to be going to increase in the rain opportunities for them. So if we take a look between that 22nd and that 27th time frame, we see that weakness with that cooler air aloft will allow the atmosphere to kind of turn over there back into Montana and through the North Dakota and South Dakota, back into northern portions of Minnesota with some heavier rains, especially dripping down into portions of Nebraska. But again, heavier rains filter inundating a good part of the southeast and much of the east coast, and eventually this gets into the action up into the northeast with those heavier rains extending through portions of off into the east coast. But beyond that, if we take a look at the extended range that actually just came out the other day, through the first 2 weeks from this Climate Prediction Center, that ridge doesn't really look to go anywhere for a while. It still looks to be locked over a good part of Texas, at least through the first 2 weeks of July, with well above average temperatures, as we have any sort of weakness in the overall setup would be just more or less average temperatures for a good part of the middle of the country, and especially the Ohio Valley and parts of the East Coast here. And then where the rain opportunities are going to be, the rains continue off the East Coast. So I do feel this is going to be a favorite area for a lot of rainfall for many days to come, if not weeks to come, around these regions. So if you're looking for rain, if you want some rain in these regions, you're going to be kind of tired of the rain, because it's going to be with you for a while, I feel, up especially off into the East Coast. And there's also going to be a pocket of abundance amount of moisture coming back for parts of Montana through Idaho as well, while much of the South and much of the desert Southwest will start to continue to remain well below normal precipitation, as that ridge is going to be really kind of favored over your region. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, definitely hit the subscribe button, and catch me next update. Fire protect you before and after the storm.